Hello, how are you? Today, inshallah, we will complete with 16.2 ideas that shades Darwin thinking part 2. You have to watch part 1 first, then part 2, okay? For my objectives today, I need you to describe Malthus' views of population growth and explain the role of inherited variation in artificial selection. So we have two ideas, population growth and artificial selection. Let's start with the population growth. For the population growth, what was the Malthus' views of population growth? The first one, Malthus reasoned that if the human population grew unchecked, there wouldn't be enough living space and food for everyone. So the unchecked growth, will decrease the living space and the food, and that will be not enough for the population. In 1798, English economist Thomas Malthus noted that humans were being born faster than people were dying, causing overcrowding. This is what we mean by overcrowding, okay? This 19th century engraving shows the crowded conditions in London during Darwin's time, and the forces that work against population growth Malthus suggested include war, famine, and disease. He reasons that if the human population grew unchecked, there wouldn't be enough living space and food for everyone. So the population growth, from the Malthus view, there will be no enough space and food for everyone. Darwin realized that Malthus' reasoning applied even more to other organisms than it did to humans. So an oak tree can produce thousands of seeds each summer. One oyster can produce millions of eggs each year. However, most of its offspring die before reaching maturity, and only a few of those that survive manage to reproduce. Darwin had become convicted that species evolve, but he needed a scientific explanation based on natural process to explain how and why evolution occurred. When Darwin realized that most organisms don't survive and reproduce, he wondered which individuals survive and why. So we need to check that by the artificial selection concept. How is inherited variation used in artificial selection? In the beginning, we need to know what you mean by artificial selection, then how the inherited variation used in artificial selection. So, in artificial selection, nature provides the variation and the humans select those they find useful. So, the human will select specific characteristics or traits that it's useful for the organisms. This is the artificial selection. And if we compare the artificial selection with the natural selection, the traits will be selected naturally by the nature or the organism itself. But the artificial selection, it's human selection or human-made, okay? To find an explanation for change in nature, Darwin studied change produced by plants and animal breeders. Breeders knew that individual organisms vary, and that some of these variation could be passed from parent to offspring and used to improve the crops and livestock. So, as an example, farmers would select for breeding only trees that produce the largest fruit or cows that produce the most milk. This is the breeder's works, okay? Over time, this selective breeding would produce trees with even bigger fruits and cows that give even more milk. So by artificial selection, the breeders or the farmers could select the breeding of the bigger plants or the plant that produce bigger fruits and the cow that produce more milk. This is how the artificial selection works. Darwin called the selective breeding process as artificial selection, a process in which nature provides the variation and the human select those they find useful. As you can see in the picture, Darwin put artificial selection to the test by raising and breeding plants and fancy pagans varieties. Darwin had no idea how heredity worked or what caused heritable variation, but he did know that the variation occur in wild species as well in domesticated plants and animals. And before Darwin, scientists thought variation among individuals in nature were simply minor defects, and Darwin recognized that natural variation was very important because it provided the raw material for evolution. And when Darwin published his scientific explanation for evolution, it changed the way people understood the living world. So you have to know what we mean by the growth and what's the effect of uncontrollable growth and the artificial selection. So at this point, we finish our lecture. Thank you and have a nice day.